Mayday, 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 Pakistan 8303.
Pakistan 8303, roger sir, both runways available to land.
When the pilot was saying these words, the passenger plane was only 600 feet high in the sky over Karachi. Due to extreme heat, everyone was confined to their homes in Karachi, Pakistan's largest city. At that time, it was 2:35 p.m. No one knew that within a few moments, an emergency situation was about to develop in Karachi. Because the pilot of Pakistan International Airlines flight PIA 8303 had sent a distress signal called Mayday. This meant that the pilot was facing extreme danger. The pilot had become completely helpless, and the aircraft had gone out of his control. Just a few seconds after this signal was sent, Karachi shook with a massive explosion, and the sky was covered with a blanket of black smoke. The Airbus, a 320 aircraft, crashed just 430 feet away from the airport. Over the densely populated model colony area. The surprising thing was that the investigation report stated there was no kind of technical fault in the aircraft. So the question arises, how did this accident happen? What exactly was the conversation between the pilot and the air traffic controller? Why and how did the first landing attempt at the same airport fail just a few minutes earlier? And what secret information came to light during the 3-year-long investigation? On 22nd May 2020, Flight 8303 was scheduled to take off from Lahore at 1 p.m. Its destination was Karachi International Airport. It was a short-duration flight, expected to reach its destination in about 1 hour and 45 minutes. At that time, the COVID lockdown was at its peak, so only a very small number of flights were operating. But on the other hand, it was the month of Ramadan, and the Eid holidays were very close. As a result, the number of flights was low, but the number of passengers was high. That means the flight was completely full. There were a total of 91 passengers and 8 crew members on board. That day, the weather was absolutely perfect, both in Lahore and in Karachi. Speaking of the pilots, the flight captain was 58-year-old Sajjad Gul. He had joined Pakistan International Airlines 24 years earlier and had about 18,000 hours of flying experience. On the other hand, the first officer was 33-year-old Usman Azam, who had been working at PIA for 10 years. It was a 16-year-old Airbus A320 aircraft equipped with 2 CFM56 turbofan engines, and both of these engines played a very important role in this story. The aircraft was in perfect condition, and it was being maintained exactly according to Airbus recommendations. After all preparations were completed at Lahore Airport, the aircraft took off at 1:05 p.m., just 5 minutes late. After some time, Flight 8303 reached an altitude of 34,000 feet, which is called the cruising altitude. The aircraft was supposed to remain at this altitude for the next 45 minutes. As soon as the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the cabin crew offered snacks to the 2 pilots, but they were fasting, so they declined the snacks. During the cruise, the pilots put the aircraft on autopilot and got engaged in casual conversation. At 1:24 p.m., the aircraft was passing over Nawab Shah, and at that exact time it was connected to the Karachi control tower. In other words, the responsibility of the previous control tower ended and full control was then handed over to the Karachi tower. The Karachi control tower welcomed the pilot and instructed him to proceed directly to Makli. Usually, aircraft flying on this route confirm with the Karachi tower after reaching Nawab Shah which route they should take toward Karachi. From Nawab Shah to Karachi, there are multiple routes available. These include Nawab Shah 2A, Nawab Shah 2B, and Nawab Shah 1C. The 2A route passes near Hyderabad, then reaches Kinja Lake, turns right, and goes straight toward Karachi Airport. The 2B route comes directly from Nawab Shah toward Karachi, and then about 28 kilometers, 15 nautical miles before the airport, it reaches the Makli area and turns left. After that, it comes onto the straight line of the airport and then turns right again. And the third route is 1C, which goes directly from Nawab Shah to the Makli area. All 3 of these routes were already pre-recorded in the aircraft's computer. That is, whichever route the pilot is assigned from Nawab Shah. the pilots save it in their flight computer. After that, the autopilot automatically controls the aircraft's altitude and speed. An important point to note here is that PIA Flight 8303 was initially assigned the Nawabshah 2A route, which is relatively longer and more indirect. But later, at the pilot's strong request, they were given permission to proceed directly to Makli. Because it was the time of the pandemic and air traffic was very low, the controller also allowed them to go directly to Makli. But the pilot's mistake here was that they did not save this shortcut route in the flight management computer. That means the computer thought the Nawabshah 2A route was selected, while in reality the aircraft was flying via the 1C route. Over the Nawabshah area, the aircraft's altitude was 34,000 feet, and at the Makli waypoint, about 28 kilometers before Karachi Airport, the aircraft was supposed to be at an altitude of 7,000 feet. Naturally, an aircraft cannot suddenly descend straight from 34,000 feet to 7,000 feet. So from Nawabshah to Makli, the altitude was supposed to be reduced gradually. If the route is long, the altitude can be reduced slowly, but if the route is short, the altitude has to be reduced more quickly. But because the 2A route was selected in the flight computer, the computer was reducing the altitude by only 1,000 feet per minute. However, the pilots were flying the aircraft via the 1C route, where the altitude needed to be reduced much more quickly. As a result, in the Makli area, where the aircraft was supposed to be at 7,000 feet, it was actually at around 10,000 feet. When the Karachi controller saw on the radar that PIA 8303 was at a higher altitude than normal, he informed the pilot that their altitude was too high and asked whether they could land safely in that condition. He asked whether they could land in that condition or if they would make a loop over the Makli area to reduce altitude. In response, the captain said no, they could land, and rejected the suggestion to circle. Up to this point, neither pilot realized that the route stored in the computer was different from the route they were actually flying. The information was in front of them, but they did not pay enough attention to it. After crossing Makli, the aircraft's nose was lowered to reduce altitude. Then the plane started descending very fast, at a rate of about 2,400 feet per minute. Because the nose was pointed downward, the plane's speed also kept increasing. After a few seconds, the plane reached about 21 kilometers away from the runway. Where the altitude was 10,000 feet a short while earlier, it dropped to 6,000 feet. But at this point, according to the rules, the plane's altitude should have been only 3,000 feet. That means they were flying at almost double the required altitude. At this time, the controller tried several times to contact the captain, but according to the flight data recorder, the pilot had accidentally changed the radio frequency. Since they could not contact the captain, they later used the emergency frequency to communicate with them. And they were informed, "You are currently at 6,000 feet, but at this point you should have been at 3,000 feet. They were again asked to make an orbit, fly in a circle, so that both the plane's speed and altitude could be reduced. But once again, the captain refused, saying,
We are comfortable, we can make it.
At this time, the captain said to the first officer, "After we land, you'll see. Everyone will be surprised." This statement was also recorded on the cockpit voice recorder, and the Karachi controller heard it as well. The Karachi controller once again instructed them to make an orbit, but for the third time, the captain rejected the suggestion. At this stage, the captain began to realize that somewhere in the flight, a major mistake had occurred. At this moment, the captain was heard saying, "Oh, what has happened? Stop, stop, finish the hold." After that, the first officer finished his hold and handed over full control to the captain. It should be remembered that up to this moment, the plane was being flown by the first officer, while the captain's responsibility was to monitor everything. But the captain did not notice that the first officer had not lowered the landing gear. PIA 8303, descending extremely fast, and at one point its speed became more than 650 kilometers per hour. At that time, the plane's various warning alarms started sounding one after another. When they got very close to the ground, another warning alarm went off because the landing gear was knocked down. At this stage, the first officer became frightened and said to the pilot, "Sir, shouldn't we really take an orbit? That way we could control both the speed and the altitude." But the captain remained firm on his decision. When they got very close to the runway, multiple alarms were sounding inside the plane at the same time. One of them was related to the landing gear. In this confusion, the plane was landed on the runway without lowering the landing gear. Within just 16 seconds, the plane touched the runway 4 times. As a result, there was a severe shaking felt inside the cabin, and both engines of the plane scraped against the runway, causing fuel to start leaking from them. By that time, the captain had already become confused because of the multiple alarms. At this moment, he realized what a terrible mistake he had made. Just then, the first officer shouted,
"Take off, sir! Take off!"
Panicking, the captain followed the first
Affirmative,
officer's
taking
words,
off.
pushed the thrust levers forward, and lifted the plane back into the air. According to experts, in this situation, the plane should have been stopped on the runway. At most, what could have happened was that the engines might have caught fire, but at least they would have been close to the airport's emergency services, so there would have been a chance to control that fire as well. But the captain did not do that. After taking off for the second time, they realized that one engine had completely failed because it had scraped against the runway. Now, the plane was flying on just one engine, and even that one was not in good condition because fuel had leaked from both engines. After that, the plane climbed to about 3,000 feet, made a go-around, and started heading back toward the runway again. At that time, the control tower informed them, "All runways are clear. You may land on any runway." At this exact moment, the last engine that was still working started to vibrate, and within a short time, it also shut down. Now, the plane was circling toward the runway with no engines at all, and its altitude was dropping rapidly. This time, the captain had lowered the landing gear early, which created extra drag and caused the plane's speed to decrease, the speed they needed the most at that moment. At just 600 feet of altitude, the plane lined up with the runway, but the captain had already realized that they would not be able to reach the runway. At that exact moment, he made a Mayday call.
Sir, Mayday, Pakistan 8303.
Then, within just a few seconds, about 1,340 meters before the runway, at 2:45 p.m., PIA Flight 8303 crashed into the residential area of Model Colony. The explosion caused by this crash was heard from many miles away, and black smoke spread across the sky. Out of the 99 people on board, including the crew, only 2 survived in an unbelievable turn of events. Because the plane crashed onto residential houses, 1 person on the ground also lost their life. Emergency rescue services reached the scene quickly, but narrow streets made their work extremely difficult. According to the investigation report, the main responsibility for this accident lies with the captain. The investigation stated that the captain repeatedly violated rules and procedures and refused to follow the air traffic controller's instructions multiple times. For this reason, the main responsibility for the accident falls on him. The second responsibility was of the air traffic controller. Why did he not tell the pilot that their landing gear was not open? If the gear had opened in the very first attempt, then perhaps this situation would not have happened. The third reason was stated that both pilots were fasting that day, meaning they had not eaten or drunk anything for the past 7 or 8 hours. Later, flying while fasting was banned. In this investigation report, this point was also mentioned. It also came out that 40% pilots of Pakistan International Airlines do not even have licenses. This revealed PIA's careless and irresponsible behavior. This clearly shows why they did not take strict action against the pilot, and why they were given so much freedom that they kept breaking rules, putting passengers' lives at risk.